From the nation's capital, this is the Fly Fishing Consultant Podcast with your host, Rob Snowland.
This is the 266th episode of the Fly Fishing Consultant Podcast. I'm sure you've got plenty of time on your hands now that we are all quarantined. So whether you are out fishing by yourself, walking in the middle of the street, or just trying to avoid your family, I've got 2.5 hours of dry fly talk to you in this episode. These podcasts are recorded the week that they are released, so the people that I'm interviewing are going through the same thing you are at the moment. This is an in-depth discussion about dry flies with Art Noglak. Art, if you may remember, is the manager of Orvis Arlington and now the current president of the Tidal Potomac Fly Rodders. In this episode, we're going to discuss everything from selectivity of trout to the presentation of dry flies to trout. We're going to hear all of Art's thoughts and theories about floatants. He's going to tell us some great stories of hanging out with Joe Humphreys. And there's all sorts of extra stuff going on in this one. This podcast was recorded after happy hour. The wife and I put down a dozen happy oysters from Sapidus Farms. If you need to order some oysters and help keep Mike in business because all the restaurants he supplies are currently closed, go to happyoysters.com. And there are a couple of drinks included during the recording of this extra long podcast. It's a long one, but hey, what else are you going to do right now? Stay tuned to this episode, and we got a really fascinating one about salmon again, but super interesting, coming up next week. Thank you so much for listening, and hey, if you want to give us some stars and some ratings, please go ahead on iTunes. Throw in a rating. Show us that you love us here at the Fly Fishing Consultant Podcast. All right, so we're going to talk dry flies today, right?
Yeah.
Let's get a refresher on who you are, what you do. And do you have a celebrity doppelganger?
So yeah, I don't know about the celebrity doppelganger. I'll have to think on that. I have one in mind. It'll be funny. But so my name is Art Noglak. I am the store manager for the Orvis company in Arlington, Virginia. I'm also the president of Tidal Potomac Fly Rodders, which I think you know very well.
Indeed. We're going to do a virtual tour on the evening that this is released. Virtual tie, I mean.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
In bourbon.
Celebrity doppelganger. I don't think I look like anybody, but I've been told when I get a few beers in me that especially when we get to talking sports or fly fishing or something I'm passionate about, that I have I begin to sound a la Stephen A. Smith, who unless you're a sportsman you wouldn't know.
It's got a big forehead.
Right, that's right.
Got a fiver.
Yeah.
Five-head.
I'm not African American, nor am I in my 50s, but yeah.
You are Italian, I believe, correct?
That's right. Yeah. That's correct.
All right. How long have you been living out in the DC metro area?
I have been here, I think, since 2015, maybe. Okay. 15, 16, somewhere in that area.
You've adjusted well. You're now married.
Yes. My wife is putting things in the fridge as we speak. My wife, Bunny.
And tell us who her sister is.
Her sister is Apple.
And who's she with? This is so funny.
Right. So that her twin sister has been dating Trent Jones for, I think, well over 10 years at this point. So Trent is a long-time TPFR, founding member and fly fishing enthusiast. So now he is my common law brother-in-law.
That's funny.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start talking about them dry flies. When did you first get introduced to the dry fly?
That's a great question. I started, what's interesting is I started fishing from a very, very young age. My father was a fisherman, and I got to know it as a native Clevelander. So, anadromous steelhead and the Great Lakes steelhead game and the smallmouth bass and things were what I kind of cut my teeth on. Carp, think warm water type of thing. And but the neighboring states of Pennsylvania and West Virginia offered some excellent trout fishing, and growing up I was able to take advantage of that. And so I've been fishing trout for a lot of years, since I don't remember the age, but fairly young, teens.
And as a historical perspective, when were you introduced to, say, the traditional English method of casting a dry fly upstream? And is that something you used or abandoned as you progressed in your fly angling?
Well, that's a great question, Rob. I think like most anglers, as somebody who's spent the last decade teaching people to fly fish and being in that community as a professional, I've come to determine that most people when they get into trout fishing, the first thing that's most important to them is how many, right? Success is typically measured in how many fish you catch, and so oftentimes people start with right angle indicator techniques, or the more recent advent of the European style nymphing, or as we like to call in our shop, nymphing without borders, or freedom nymphing. Those types of techniques typically produce more fish, and so I think people gravitate towards those techniques, and I definitely did when I first started fly rodding, if you will, for trout. So I bet that I was fly fishing for trout for well over a year before I ever even caught a fish on a dry fly. And then even when I did, it would only be like I would only ever even think to tie a dry fly on if there was like some sort of blanket hatch going on, and fish all around me were rising, or if there was one fish that was continuously rising over and over and over and over again with reckless abandon. It would take a lot for me to even consider tying on a dry fly, because the industry and all the publications and all the reading and all the books and everything I knew about dry fly fishing was that it was damn near impossible to get a fish to eat a dry fly unless it was consistently rising. And even at that, they were far more selective when they were eating dry flies on the surface. So if I wanted to be successful, I would go out and even if there were fish to be had on the surface, I would still continue to nymph, because I just felt like I would always catch more.
I realized last year in England that the reason you want to come say hi to Art. You can't hear.
Hey, Pixie.
Get closer to the microphone.
Hello.
She sounds like a cherub, doesn't she?
She does.
Go watch your princess movie. I think she's watching Princess Diaries 2.
Oh, right on.
Just get out of my... Okay. So I realized last year in England that I couldn't see anything in these overcast conditions, in these springy creeks covered in canopies of trees. No one had polarized glasses back then, so they couldn't see a trout unless it was actually feeding on top. My theory is that's where the English tradition of only sight casting to a rising trout came from. Otherwise, you'd just be wasting your time.
So you want to hear a great story?
Always.
I'm gonna give you a great story. So this was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and at the time I was actually working for. Well, I was still working for Orvis, but I was out of the Pittsburgh location at that time. And Tom Rosenbauer helped, he set up a Joe Humphreys to come and do, or he helped me to facilitate Joe, and I've known Joe for years, and to come do a presentation. And Joe, if you haven't ever seen Joe Humphreys do a live presentation, he's one of the best. And so he came out, but he doesn't drive anymore. So, I drove out there to pick him up and drop him off, and he's unfortunately subjected to my my driving and navigational ability. And anybody who's ever been in a car with me knows that you're taking your life into your own hands. But we get into this, long story longer, we get into this conversation about seeing fish, right? Like how you can see fish so well. And I think I can't remember if it was when I was dropping him off or I was picking him up, but we were in his backyard and we were looking into Spring Creek. He's got if anyone has ever been to Joe's house, he's got like his own, kind of private section of Spring Creek there in Bellefonte in his backyard. And he's got no glasses on, and he's showing me all these different fish and where they are. And it's amazing because he can see deep into the water with no polarized sunglasses on. Maybe, and I can barely see these fish with them on.
He's part osprey.
Right. And so, it's interesting that you talk about that because, sometimes we take that for granted, like our generation, we grew up with like all this technology, phenomenal polarized sunglasses. We can peer through the water. These guys didn't have any of that, even 30 years ago, 25 years ago. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I believe that. Because I think those guys, Joe can, some of these guys can see through the water without glasses just fine because they know what to look for.
Later on in my random questions segment, number 18 is a good Joe Humphreys story. So you're going to have to give me another one later.
I have a couple, yeah.
All right. Also, by the way, what did you stock up on for your quarantine?
What did I stock up on?
Yes. What have you been hoarding yourself?
That's a great question. You know what it is? And it's really not so much myself, it's my wife. So it's Haagen-Dazs cookies and cream, which is actually kind of hard to find. And if you do your research, the Washington Post just recently had an article of the top cookies and cream ice creams in the country. It was ranked number 2.
How about that?
Right. Yeah. So that's
how much pork belly did you stock up on?
Well, we're always well stocked on pork belly. My wife's Filipino, and so that is a staple in many dishes. So we eat a lot of pork belly anyway.
Very nice.
Yeah, we're trying not to hoard anything, because there's no like food shortage. It's not. I mean, there's definitely been some things that have been difficult to get, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, food doesn't seem to be the major issue. It's like the cleaning supplies and the toilet paper.
I used to be mocked for my bidet. Who's mocking me now?
Do you have a bidet?
Yeah, dude.
Wow.
After traveling to Europe, I'm like,
I'm not gonna.
We can skip that part.
I'm not gonna promise that I'm not gonna mock you for that.
Yeah. Did the H Mart y'all go to down the street, the secret one?
It's the best H Mart in the world. Yeah. We still go there, even though we don't live there anymore.
They have Hello Kitty toilet paper with Hello Kitty on it.
I believe it.
Yeah.
That is the cleanest, most well-organized, maybe not even just H Mart, but just grocery store that I've ever been.
The H Mart in Annandale just smells like low tide. And then you walk into this one, you're like, it's sparkling in here.
You should tell the listeners, H Mart, where's that? That's the Burke. The Burke. Oh, it's amazing. Like we get lobsters there all the time for like $7.99 a pound. And they're amazing. I mean, their seafood section's phenomenal. It doesn't even smell.
You can't throw those lobsters in an Instapot anymore.
Yeah, that's right. We got rid of that.
Dude, we made chicken marbella in it, the Ina Garten recipe. Oh my god. So
yeah, when we moved to Clarendon, for your listeners, when we moved to Clarendon, we had a smaller place, and so we gave Rob all sorts of different small appliances that we can't fit. Instapot, and what else did I give you?
Deep fryer, but we just ordered. We're on our 3rd air fryer. I really like the Emerald brand, but they keep crapping out. A frozen chimichanga from the grocery store, 17 minutes at 400, will come out as if it was deep fried at Chewy's down the street.
So we're not really into them in the U.S. so much, but my wife, has introduced me to. We cook a lot of her Filipino stuff and just different things in it. It's called a turbo broiler, which is similar to an air fryer, but a little bit different. You can get them like at Walmart for .com for like $25, and it's basically like a convection oven with a glass top, right? And there's a heating element built in, but it's amazing, man. We'll throw like chicken wings in there, or chicken leg quarters, pork belly, and it's just so succulent and crispy, whatever you put in there, and it cooks in no time at all. And there's just no mess to clean up, which is just, so yeah, I love it.
Not dry flies.
Yep.
All right. Let's when you see a fish feeding on top, what should your plan of action be? Let's say you're sitting there, you're either waiting it out, you're walking a stream, or all of a sudden something. Like I was in Colorado once in Frisco, and I just started seeing rise. It was nothing, and I started popping, and I think it was the sound of the mayflies popping their shucks, and I probably caught 7 or 8 trout during a hatch on a lime wolf. I never experienced dry fly fishing like that ever in my life. And I just happened to be the right place at the right time. What would you do if you saw a hatch starting?
So, number one is like, just to answer your initial question, is your initial question was, you're walking along and you see a trout rise. And the reality is the first thing you need to do, in my opinion, is wait, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they, immediately start like, just wailing on that fish with reckless abandon with whatever they have on at the particular time. And I think it's best to take your time and get a little bit more information about what's going on in your surroundings, So, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but I am not a believer that trout are selective. So I don't think I don't believe that trout are very selective creatures by any stretch of the definition. So, I think that not to say that they will eat anything, and not to say that they're not more selective or less selective at particular times and on certain rivers and in certain situations, but by their very nature, I think that, any selective creature is probably now extinct. I think that they're not that they'll eat anything either, but they're opportunistic. All that being said, I think that, you have to like identify some different things, like one, is there multiple fish feeding in the pool, or in the area? Is there one that's closer to you than the fish that you saw that you could maybe catch first? Is there, a lot of bugs on the surface? Is the fish rising consistently, or is it inconsistent? What do you have tied on at that particular time? What have you had success with earlier in the day before you saw that fish? There's a lot of different variables that go into it. And so as soon as you see a fish rise, I think the best practice is to wait, and try to gather some information before you make that presentation and put that fish down.
What methods would one do not to spook a fish?
So, I think, the classic things are always like, keep a low profile and, and crouch and all these things that none of us really do unless people are looking. But I would say stay behind them, and which is why the upstream method, I think, we talked about it earlier, the upstream English method, I think that's probably born more out of necessity, right? If you're behind a fish and you make an upstream presentation with a nice drag-free drift, and as long as you don't give that fish anything but leader and you don't smack the water right over top of them, they're not going to be spooked too often. Even on limestone streams and spring creeks, I think that especially if they're pressured, here on the East Coast, like, we complain all the time about how pressured waters are, and yes, and they are, because we have high population densities, but at the same time, like, there's no doubt that they're used to people standing over them, and walking by them. Like, there's very famous streams here on the East Coast that have very famous pools on them that, have names that are, that, I'll fish on a regular basis, at least a couple times a year, where you put a fish down and then, 10 minutes later or less, he's eating again. They're not that afraid of you, on these higher pressure streams.
So with that in mind, would you say there are some myths involved with dry fly fishing and spooking fish?
Some of the greatest lies ever sold, in my opinion, revolve around dry fly fishing, or fly fishing especially, or just dry fly fishing specifically. Yes, the selectivity element is the biggest, the biggest one. The match the hatch concept, and although that's a great overgeneralization of how you can be successful, it's by no means an exact science. And the fact that you need to have a pocket guide to eastern mayflies and a thorough understanding of every scientific name and genus and subspecies, and in order to be successful on a trout stream is an unbelievable myth. When I teach classes about this kind of stuff, I always ask people, like if I'm doing a group class or something, I always kind of get into this, show of hands, how many of you have caught a trout on a piece of corn? And you get all these hands go up. Or like, how many of you have caught a fish on a hot dog? And how many of you have caught a fish on a piece of soap? Or how many of you have tried to put a Cheeto on a hook? Or and like all these hands are going up, and this better than anybody. But the reality is fish eat what might be food. Why? Because they have to. Because if they don't, they'll die. They can't be that selective, right? They have to take advantage of an opportune food source. Not sometimes, almost every time, based on a lot of different things. Tom Rosenbauer, who I know real well, he talks and honestly, let me digress here for a second. One of the best explanations about trout selectivity that I've ever read, and I read this many, many years ago. I don't remember when he published this book relative to when I bought it, but his book, Prospecting for Trout, which is one of his older books.
That's 2 podcasts in a row that this book has been brought up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I haven't listened, but it's funny. I'm featured in the sequel to that book, actually, which is pretty cool. Tom, I did some stuff with Tom on his the sequel to that, which is Fly Fishing for Trout, which is like a more advanced version of that book. But anyway, Prospecting for Trout, in my opinion, and I've read a lot of stuff, is probably in my humble opinion, is probably one of the better how-to trout fishing books I've ever read. And if I remember correctly, the subtitle is like What to Do When There's Not a Hatch to Match. He talks about the fertility of streams in that book. And for whatever reason, that's always resonated with me. And, basically the way the difficulty of the stream is really about it's when there's less insect life in the stream, it's easier.
They're more selective. They can't afford not to pass up an elm leaf floating by versus if it's a mayfly that looks just like it.
Correct. So and if I remember, I haven't read this book in, well over 10 years, I'm sure, but he uses like the example of like a brook trout stream, right? You have these high gradient streams that there's very little insect life in it, comparatively speaking, which always cracks me up when I like see people that put hatch charts on for tiny little brook trout streams in the Shenandoah. But
we used to put up the so the old Orvis store at Tyson's back in the old days. We put up the Royal Coachman hatch. Mr. Rapidans are coming off right now.
That's great advice. That's phenomenal advice. But anyway, he uses that example of like streams that aren't very fertile. There's, comparatively speaking, there's not a ton of insect life hatching out of those streams. And common sense tells you that it's just because of the gradient, right? They're so high up in the mountains, and that stuff's, tumbling down those rocks and just filtering everything out of there so quickly. And, which is why brook trout are so easy to catch, if you will, and they're not selective at all. It cracks me up when people think like, well, they're small fish, so I need to feed them a small fly. I don't fish anything below a size 14 And most of the time I'm fishing 12s for brook trout ever. There's never a reason that I've ever needed to go under a 14. If you look at their mouth size comparative to their body,
It's a big gaping hole.
It really is. I mean, and
it's like a whale.
Right. And I'm sure, and I don't know this, I'm not a biologist at all, but and I'm not even a very smart person, but I'm definitely in the common sense Hall of Fame. They have big mouths, I think, specifically to tackle, large food sources. I mean, we've all seen them eat big moths and, giant insects and big beetles. And, I've seen videos of those things eating mice patterns and all kinds of stuff. And, they're relatively easy to catch. And then, on the flip side, these lower gradient streams, these, spring creeks or, limestone influenced streams, they collect, there's a lot of sediment there and a lot of grasses and various adolas and watercress and things that, grow up underneath the water. And so they just attract all this various kinds of bug life. And so those fish, that would be an example of a very fertile stream. And those fish, can in fact be a lot more selective because they have so many different food sources to go after. But even with that being said, let me preface by saying, I'm not saying that I haven't come across streams that are extremely difficult. Believe me, I've been skunked, more times than you could ever imagine. But I've never come to a stream that I was convinced that the fish were so unbelievably selective that I didn't have anything in my box that could possibly fool that fish.
So let's talk about what's in your box. If there is a hatch going on, what would you be throwing to each specific hatch situation?
Well, I think the idea is what I like to do is if it's a thick hatch, I like to get as close as possible and then go one size up. That's kind of a general rule. A lot of people say like go smaller. I don't like that. I like to go one size up. So, if I know that, okay, well, hey, look, there's a bunch of, little yellow bugs coming off. They're probably sulfurs. It's that time of year. They look like 16s. I'm going to my box and I'm probably going to pull out, and it depends on the water, right? If the water's choppy, and I'm fishing a river like, if I'm here on the East Coast, for instance, and maybe I'm on like the lower Savage and there's a lot of pocket water there.
Shout out to DJ.
Oh, yeah. He's the guy who really freaking taught me how to fish that river. That's one of my favorite on the East Coast. PJ Daly of Savage River Angler. He's really one of the best trout guides on the East Coast, and he does and I've fished with a lot of them, and he does the lower Savage and its various the Savage River and its various tributaries and brook trout fishing in the area, but he also does float fishing on the North Branch of the Potomac River as well, and that's kind of in the West Virginia, Maryland panhandle. That river's like high gradient little tailwater, and there's a lot of pocket water and ripply water, and so I'm going to want to fish something that I'm going to be able to see really well and it's going to float. So I might do a like a parachute sulfur, or during sulfur season on that river, my favorite fly in the pocket water anyway is Charlie Meck Patriot fly, which is kind of a wolf-esque like 2-post pattern with a little yellowy tinsel, and I'll put that in the pocket water. So that's a good idea, and that'll usually be like a 14 or a 12. If it's a 16 sulfur, I'm going to put on a 14 fly, right? Because I want to, number one, I want to be able to see my fly in a big hatch, and in a big hatch, I want to, especially if there's a lot of bugs and the fish are feeding heavy, I want the fish to be able to differentiate my fly from the flies on the water. And anybody who tells you that, like, and then sure, if I get a few drag-free drifts past that fish and it doesn't look at it, or if I get a refusal, I might downsize the fly. But typically, I don't have a problem with that one size up rule.
Let's say they're fish rising and you don't have a specific fly, is there something you would throw to replicate, say a caddis, mayfly, or stonefly, or grasshopper, or midge? Are there general patterns that somebody could use to kind of represent several things?
Yeah, I mean,
A prospecting fly, if you will.
so there's a few answers to that question. One is, if you're asking me, if you asked a question, if you have a soulfish rising and you can't for the life of you see anything on the water or figure out what he's rising to, absolutely. So if I can't determine what that fish is rising to, I'm almost every time going to throw on a rusty spinner or an ant. These are things that, mayfly spinners, unless it's the dead of winter, mayfly spinners and ants are two things that you're always going to be able to find, or more than often than not, be able to find on any river across the U.S. And they're very generic, and they're typically, all year long. So, like a size 16 rusty spinner is just a phenomenal pattern. I like to fish the west branch of the Delaware a lot. I don't ever get up there as much as I'd like, but that's one of my favorite dry fly rivers. And I've fished a lot of places in this country, and that'll definitely be on my top 10 list of places for dry fly fishing. And if it's very rare that you can't get a fish to eat a rusty spinner on that river.
Is it the color you think they just see differently?
No, I think it's just a common.
Or your confidence in it?
Well, I think confidence in a fly is extremely important. I think the confidence in the fly that you have is probably more important than what the fish are eating. In all honesty, because I think you'll be able to get a fish to eat a wide variety of things that look like they might be food and easily obtainable. But I think that a mayfly spinner, especially in the spring or summer months, is just something that they've seen a ton of, right? Especially if there was a hatch the evening before, the next morning there's going to be mayfly spinners floating down the river for miles and miles and miles. So that's just a great blanket guess. The disadvantage of a fly like that is it's difficult to see on the water, especially if there's a little bit of gradient, or if you were to make a long cast, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see. There's some great parachute ant patterns that are also good for that. Travis parachute ant is one of my favorites. I tie that one a lot.
Who is Travis? I asked Rosenbauer once if he could talk to the actual people that designed some of the flies for Orvis, because the Travis bead a bugger may have been one of the greatest streamers Orvis ever sold and discontinued. Do you know who Travis is?
I don't know. No, I don't.
My goodness.
I can't.
An urban legend.
But and it also depends on the time of day. My all-time favorite dry fly that no one ever fishes.
Chubby Chernobyl.
No, that one that's a great fly, and I love that fly, but is the white wolf. If it's dark out and the fish start rising, especially to a spinner fall, or if you wait in the evening and you've got a nice hatch going and there's fish rising all around, you're struggling to see your fly. I'm almost to the point now where when it turns dark, I just tie like a size 10 or 12 white wolf on, and I just fish that over the risers because I can see it really well. It's suggestive of a lot of things. They're definitely not as picky in the dark. And at nighttime, just the moonlight somehow reflects off of those white posts like that. And I've stood next to really, really good anglers, and went fish for fish with them with that fly. I think it's just because you can see it so well. I have so much confidence in that fly. It's unbelievable. And I think it's probably my confidence in the fly that just makes me fish it better and hone in on it and just wait for that eat.
There sounds like there's thumping in the background.
I think that was me cracking a beer
Before that. All right. What about two fly rigs. Are you going to do a white wolf? Because I love a wolf fly with an RS2 behind it. That to me, whew, I can have a full day of trout fishing with that rig.
That's a great rig. I think with dry fly fishing, number one is, when you're fishing when you're prospecting, prospecting is you're blind casting a dry fly to likely areas that would hold fish that might come up and eat a dry fly. A few things that are important is, one, you want to fish something that's going to get the fish's attention. You want to fish a fly that gives a reason for that fish to, rise when it otherwise wouldn't have. And so to do that, you typically want to fish a fly that's larger, like a size 10 or a size 12, or, sometimes even a size 8. And those wolf patterns like you talked about, or a chubby Chernobyl, or a Turk's tarantula is a favorite of mine.
Do you know Turk? Is that a real person?
I don't know.
My goodness. Come on, dude. You're the manager.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure it is. I think that first you need a big fly. And, a lot of times it's kind of the attention grabber deal, so some people say that, you might be able to get them to look at, a large fly like a royal wolf, but they might not eat it or refuse it. But you might be able to get their attention with it. And so if you drop a smaller fly like an RS2 or a Griffiths gnat or something a foot behind it, they might look at the large gaudy fly, and while they're up there, they might be fooled by the gnat. Typically, I don't fish the big fly, small fly rig, but I definitely see the merit. I will typically fish in a merger behind it, right? So, if I'm seeing fish, rise, like on a far bank, and I pass a parachute Adams over it or something like that, a generic fly, I get a refusal. I might not take the fly off and tie another fly on. I might just take a smaller emerger pattern and drop it off the parachute Adams and send it right into the same lane, all the while knowing he looked at the parachute Adams and maybe refused it, so he'll definitely look at it again, right? He might not take it, but he may take the fly directly after it. And I think that's typically when I'm fishing too. I'm usually not using two flies to prospect. I'm usually throwing two flies at a rising fish.
As somebody who makes a living selling flies to people, what happens with your knowledge that trout are not as selective as they are, yet you have a customer who comes in insisting they need a size 14 Quill Gordon for brook trout, and only this stream is where this exact size and fly works, and you have someone that's adamant about that? Do you just say, let me bring you over to the size 14 Quill Gordons, or are you like, brother, let me sit you aside here and have a little talk?
No, I sell them whatever it is they're looking for, first and foremost, because what they're confident in and what they've read about, number one, is extremely important. And even if you don't necessarily agree with it, it's definitely important. Like, that person clearly did their diligence. I mean, if they came in and they're saying, hey, I need this fly for this stream because, as you said, this is where, I know this thing works. I mean, why would you argue with that? But what you can also do too is offer some of your own insight and your own suggestion to go along with that. And, look, we're in the business of selling flies. So, of course, I'm going to sell you the ones that you're looking for, but I might also give you some other local suggestions or some things that I might know to go along with it. I know that sounds like a super politically correct answer, but, unless it's some kind of egregious thing that's going to cause that customer to have an experience out on the water that, they're not going to be happy with, I'm going to sell them what they're looking for.
All right. What would your favorite mayfly be to fish and your most popular mayfly to sell?
So I think on the East Coast, everyone's going to have the same answer with what they sell, and that's probably the sulfur, right? I mean, you can see sulfurs any as early as late May, and on certain rivers, all the way through October, on certain rivers, right? So it's a really healthy, prolific hatch that runs for a very long period of time here on the East Coast. I'd be lying if I didn't say that wasn't my favorite hatch to fish. It's freaking as a yellow bug. It's pretty big, 16, 14, and it's just about everywhere. So, that's probably the best selling mayfly for sure. And it's definitely, one of my favorite hatches. But outside of that, it's really hard to beat the blue quill hatches on certain rivers on the East Coast. Not all of them get them, but that's like typically one of the first hatches of the year. And so, if the weather's right, the fish are really dumb. It's kind of the first time they're really looking up for a good size mayfly. Blue quills and red quills and quill Gordons. That's a great time, and that time is really like kind of now. And that's like late March, early April. That's when that really, starts going. The Hendrickson hatch on the west branch of the Delaware, and some of the other, East Coast streams here, and then, northern part of the East Coast get these great Hendricksons certain times a year early. That's a phenomenal hatch to fish. If you haven't checked that one out, you really should. And then, the late season action, is a lot of fun too. I love fishing rivers in the shoulder season when people are, are done. I love going and throwing ants in September and October, and beetles and, little hoppers, and it's a ton of fun. But, of course, the West Coast has its own mixed bag of things that are phenomenal. Like, one of my favorite things that I used to do, or that I absolutely love, is the Skawala Stonefly hatch in Missoula area.
Stoneflies, Pat's rubber legs.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't tie that fly for my life. I don't know why. I can't tie it.
That's a great fly. That would probably be in my top 10. I don't really nymph much anymore, but when I did, that was always on my rig.
The roof pool with some trout if they stop putting chlorine in it.
That would be a good idea. That'd be fun.
Osprey might pick it off.
Yeah.
All right. So what is your favorite stonefly pattern to fish, and what is your most popular to sell? Thrice, have you ever seen an adult eaten by a trout on the East Coast? Rosenbauer says it doesn't happen.
Wait a minute. Have you ever seen...
Rosenbauer says on his podcast that East Coast trout do not eat adult stoneflies. It's a theory of his. He also had a theory that jumping trout are caused by crayfish nipping at their bellies, which he mentioned once is more jokingly. But yeah, he doesn't really think that...
Tom and I have had this argument about not an argument, but this discussion about the adult stonefly thing on the East Coast more than once. One, I disagree with him. I know for a fact that I have seen trout eating adult stoneflies on a regular basis I can think of 2 different occasions on 2 different rivers where I know I've watched trout eating yellow sallies. Now, I actually fished the Savage River with Tom Rosenbauer some years back, and him and I had this discussion about the yellow sallies. And he talked about how he thinks that when they're eating the yellow sallies that they think that they're sulfurs, which, in his defense, I could see that. I mean, those hatches kind of coincide at very similar times. Those yellow sallies start up kind of right as the sulfurs are winding down. So, and they're roughly the same, the same size. But I've definitely seen them eating the yellow sallies. Now, I have caught plenty of trout on, larger stonefly patterns like chubbies. And to answer your question, the chubby Chernobyl would definitely be my favorite, stonefly pattern, dry fly pattern. But but to Tom's point, like, I have seen tons of larger adult stoneflies popping and bouncing on rivers. And like, yeah, I mean, I'm more surprised with how often they don't get eaten than when they do. So although I disagree with, if Tom's contention is that it never happens, I'm going to disagree with him. But
Tom's like, he's saying they're like baby pigeons. You don't see them. Not have an answer for baby pigeons, but that's the theory.
Right.
You never see
like a tree falls in the woods and, does it make a sound type of thing. I mean, he's definitely onto something there. I mean, look, there's just not as many stoneflies. You see, you see the shucks up on the rocks all the time, but you're right. I mean, it's not as prolific as the mayfly and caddisfly hatches that we have here. I have more often than not, when I see a big stonefly on the water, it more often than not does not get eaten.
Do they have a noxious taste? Like water striders apparently taste nasty to fish. There's a chemical in them.
I was literally on a stream not too long ago quoting you with a guy.
Sweet. Was it a good quote or something ridiculous?
No, it was actually about the water striders.
Oh, they'll bite, man. My daughter even knows not to grab them.
And the guy was asking me like why fish don't eat them, and I said the same thing.
Also, I've noticed that fish, when you've got a huge school, I don't know if you call them a school, there's got to be a name for a group of water striders. But when they're on the surface thick enough, fish will hide out in the shade underneath them. And if you can drag, say, like a damselfly nymph, snow white damsel, through that water, you will pick up fish left and right. I think it just creates sort of a security blanket above them where they feel a little less scared of birds and other things, and they're going to eat more. This happens at Riverbend. Okay, how about caddis? Your favorite caddis pattern and the most popular caddis purchased in the store.
Well, and back to your mayfly thing really quick. The most popular mayfly purchased in the store is technically a parachute Adams. And then on the caddis side, the most popular purchased in the store is far and away the elk hair caddis.
Is that just because it's just so buoyant and it has the appearance of fluttering wings on the surface when it's still?
I mean, look, the reality is people buy what you suggest, and that's
the special of the day.
Yeah, that's the reality of it, and I think that in most cases that most books you look in, you start talking about the top 5 flies or the top 10 flies, things like parachute Adams and elk hair caddis and woolly buggers and Clouser minnows and those types of things. They're phenomenal flies, and they've obviously earned their place on those lists. And have certainly caught, I'm sure, more fish than any other flies. Nymphs, pheasant tails and hare's ear nymphs. Those are always going to be the best selling for sure. But they're not always my favorites. I have my own personal favorites. Like my personal favorite caddis pattern is definitely an X caddis for sure.
Do you know who Matthew is?
No, I don't know who he is, but that's the one I like the best, actually. I like the Matthews version of the X caddis with the black thorax and the brown Z-line off the back. That's the version of the X caddis that I like the most. Dan Davala.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of dry fly fishing together. Used to be more, obviously much more often when he lived here, but now that he's moved on to Vermont, we try to get together once or twice a year and
I need to go
do
on one
some
of those trips. Count
Yeah,
me
they're
in.
fun.
I got the drift boat. It
Yeah.
literally is just collecting vines on it right now.
Well, we don't like to drift boat fish on those trips though.
Oh,
See, like when we go on those trips with Dan and I and Trent, we just sit on the bank. We take like lawn chairs or folding camping chairs and cast iron skillets and like really really good steaks and charcuteries and fancy beers and bourbons and coolers.
I'm in.
And we just go down to a pool and just stay there all day and just like make casts at risers while the other two heckle. So we really don't fish like that hard. We definitely catch fish, but it's like dry or die. And we just spend the time like catching up and just enjoying ourselves and talking about family and friends and funny stories and reminiscing. And if a trout just so happens to rise, someone will make a cast at it.
I almost wish they would let Dan work remotely from here.
Yeah, that would be cool. I bet you he could too. Like I've been up there. I've gone to work with him for a day. I think at least one time. I feel like it's been more than once, but I've gone up there and like stayed with him in Vermont a couple times, and I went to work with him once, and I bet you he could. And now that this is going on with this pandemic thing, he has the technology now to work remotely. So, but they love it up there.
I feel like that the technology that Dan has to work remotely would be like my conversation with my in-laws today about them getting Instapot and them not knowing what an Instapot is, and that it's modern and convenient, but they still would cook everything in a pan the old-fashioned way.
Well, I talked to him like when he first got it, and he got it figured out, and he was out in his garage, and he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm all hooked up with wireless, and and I got lines coming out, and I can talk to customers and talk to, he got it figured out." But I mean, this is a guy like, who doesn't own a cell phone, and heats his house with a wood stove.
Bathe on, was it on Fridays? The family tub.
I don't know if that's
You
true.
got corn husks for teepee.
That sounds like urban legend.
I bet they have a complete what's the word I'm thinking of? Homestead.
Well, I think they've got a lot of plans for that property they have.
With
I think
skate park probably, or at least a half pipe.
Well, I think he's already got that going on. Like he's got ramps and stuff in his garage already built. So it's really cool. Did he tell you the story about his house and the Tracty brothers?
Possibly. We did have a very long Pappy Winkle induced conversation this about a year ago, actually.
Interesting. Well, I'll let him save that story. But
and the goat in Montana with the bourbon.
No, that's a Vermont story. Actually.
That's a Vermont. I thought that was Montana.
Yeah. No, that's a Vermont story too.
A client told me about that. Unless there's a Montana story too, where he's had more encounters with insidious goat. Okay.
I think there can be only one goat story, but he's got 10 acres up there. I think he's got a tributary of the Battenkill called the Green River that runs through the backyard, and it's got wild browns and brook trout and stuff in it, and some of the like iconic pools on the Battenkill are right on the bottom of his street, on the road there, and you can drive down to the bottom of his road, and there's like a great covered bridge pool that's got like Norman Rockwell's old house on it, and you can fish it. We've done it before, and fish this pool, and it's gorgeous and has great fish in it. Yeah, I think he has plans to to get into some small animals like chickens or goats and things like that. Just
my buddy Owen had a tree fall today that almost took out his, because we had some crazy wind, as you know. He almost lost his chickens today because of some wind down in Fredericksburg. Had a tree come down between his house and the chicken coop, and that is a very precious thing right now during quarantine, is to get your fresh eggs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dan needs to get a hold of some animals.
Yeah,
start his own like farm.
I've been talking to him on the phone, and I don't think their lives have changed all that much. I mean, his kids are homeschooled, and Melody has always homeschooled the kids. So they're kind of it's kind of almost business as usual for them, I think,
Right.
in this situation. Yeah.
Do you have to pee or something? All right, so we talked about Mayfly, caddis, stone. You mentioned briefly some terrestrials. Do you have specific patterns? Again, your favorite terrestrials, and then ones that customers would come in looking for. Now, Orvis, I want to say like 2000, 2001. Orvis used to sell this crazy dense Chernobyl ant that when it landed, you could hear it from 20 feet away. And back when I had private access to the Little J at Spruce Creek, that fly was unbelievable in what it would produce. But what do you like to fish? And tell us also about the chubby Chernobyl, because that's sort of maybe the last 10 years that fly came out. Anything you could tell us about it. Also, what customers come in for.
Yeah, so that fly is not a good seller on the East Coast, and it should be. People on the East Coast fish flies that are too small, in my humble opinion. I think we've ingrained in their heads that at least dry fly fishermen, we've ingrained in their heads that trout are extremely picky and extremely selective, and these dainty, delicate little little things, and you gotta give the nod to the streamer anglers, and just like everybody else, I went through my big streamer phase.
Streamer bros.
Yeah, I went through that phase.
Is Mason a streamer bro?
We all did. Yeah, I think he goes through phases. I think he's more of a nymph fisherman, but he definitely does throw some big streamers too.
Homie's catching some redfish on quarantine.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, and there's not that there's anything wrong with that at all. I mean, I used to love chucking those things and catching big fish too. But anyway, the point I'm making is those guys have taught us that even when you're throwing those big flies, what's more amazing than how many bigger fish you catch with those larger flies often is how small some of the fish are that eat some of those large flies. I mean, as a warm water angler, I'm sure you come across that often. If you're chucking a big half and half, often a small fish will attack that thing. And it's the same in my opinion with dry flies. Often those flies like chubby Chernobyls and those larger dry flies are often the ones that will get a bigger fish to come up off the bottom or out of his holding line to eat a large fly. So if you're prospecting, that's a phenomenal fly to.
So like Joan Wolf in her casting video compared to the Royal Wolf to be a strawberry shortcake, delicious. Whereas the chubby Chernobyl is like a Thanksgiving dinner with the trimmings. It's just a huge meal for anybody that wants to eat it. It's a good bass fly too.
No, and that sounds like a good analogy to me. So that's probably my favorite. That and I really like that Travis that para ant. It's super simple. Simplicity is critical with flies. I think the more intricate they get, the less fish they catch.
Right. So do you have favorite hatches you like to travel to?
That's a good question. No. I think the best time to fish is when you have time. There's definitely hatches that happen on certain times a year that I'm excited to fish. The sulfurs again are one, and the Hendricksons. Some of the larger hatches like the green drakes and ISOs and things like that. If they're happening, I'm excited about it. But I won't specifically travel somewhere for to fish a specific hatch. No.
Would there be a bucket list of hatches then that would negate that, like a Mother's Day hatch here, or say the lemming hatch here, or the moon mice hatch in New Zealand? Is there specific hatch that if you were there at the right time would just blow your mind?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of hatches that would blow my mind. And I've been in situations with some of the hatches that you've just described that have in fact blown my mind. But I'm never gonna make any travel arrangements around particular hatch. Now, if I decide one day that I want to, pony up and go to New Zealand, which is one thing that's on my bucket list to do, I've always wanted to go there. Of course, I'm gonna want to go at the best time of year, and when the fishing is going to be the best, and maybe we'll, try to arrange it around a specific hatch. But no, I don't currently or have ever done any travel specifically for an insect hatch. No.
All right. Let's talk about fly tying.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a preference for modern versus classic materials and patterns that you're going to tie yourself? And what vise are you tying on these days?
Well, I've got a couple of vices that I tie on, but the one I probably tie on the most, kind of day in, day out is the Renzetti Traveler 2000 or whatever it is. I mean, that's, there's a lot of great vices out there that I like, and I might consider buying those vices one day if this Renzetti ever breaks. But I've been tying on this thing for 10 years. Like it's great. So there's no reason to get rid of it.
All right.
You know what I mean? Like I sometimes at work when I do tying lessons and things like that at work, I'll use the Regal, which I really like that one too. That Regal's a phenomenal vise. I tie on them. Usually when I'm doing lessons, I'm typically using that vise when I'm an instructor. And that's mostly just because that's what I have access to at work. And those are phenomenal. I love the jaws. The pedestal is very heavy. I'm a clumsy guy, so I knock things over. So that big, brass pedestal is excellent. But I also really like the material holder, and I will also say that just because the Renzetti is a rotary vise, but I don't use any rotary functions. I won't say I don't. I do on occasion. But if I didn't have access to a rotary vise, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest.
Okay. Do you have a preference of materials you like for dry flies? And I'll preface this with I was at the first Edison fly fishing show. I was next to a guy, I forget his name, from the Delaware, a good friend of Richie's, and he was using EP fibers and tying these crazy split wing spinner dry flies that I think I'm gonna have to learn how to tie while I'm home quarantined.
Yeah.
That's something I want to learn. But do you have a preference for materials you're going to use? So we already talked about the Patriot, some chubbies, and do you do synthetic? Do you do natural?
So I if I had to pick, it would be natural. However, I really like flies that have a combination of both, to best suit their need, your needs. So, a perfect example is if I'm fishing like slow moving pools or softer runs with not a lot of riffly water, rivers that don't have a lot of gradient, I'm typically fishing like Comparadun style patterns. It's funny, like, you go up to I go up to the Catskills at least once a year. And I always love to fish the West Branch of the Delaware, and sometimes the Upper East. And it's funny, it's like, I never use any Catskill patterns there. I always use lower profile flies, and a Comparadun style bug with like a Zelon shuck for a tail is one of my favorites. That's a perfect example of natural, fibers with the elk hair, Comparadun hair, and I'll often use like a goose biot for a body. One of my favorite emerger patterns is a breadline emerger, and it has like a little tuft of snowshoe and some dubbing in whatever color of mayfly you're trying to imitate, and it's got a Zelon shuck and a goose biot, palmered around for the body. So the Patriot's another good example where it's got like a tinsel or a flash shaboo body, but it's got calf tail wing and hackle. So I think it's best to embrace the new materials while also taking advantage of natural fibers too. But I don't I don't specifically, I tie a lot more for like function, and I like the way that the natural, like old school flies look a lot better, and I enjoy fishing them, but they're not always as functional as some, when you add some of the newer synthetics, make things a lot simpler to tie.
What would you consider some of the older patterns? Say we've got new listeners that are home quarantine and this is maybe their first fly fishing podcast they're ever going to listen to. What would you consider an old school pattern versus a new school pattern?
That's a really good question.
I figure we're going 2 hours with this conversation, so we might as well dive deep.
Sure. So, what's interesting is the advent of dry flies and like their evolution is not as dramatic as other types of patterns, right? So if you look at like, what was the game changer of the 1920s or 1930s?
Better hackle than others, maybe?
What was that? No, I mean, like you think about it, like the big streamer of, as far back as 100 years ago looked something like like a gray ghost or a
like
Mickey
Carrie Stevens kind of wet fly streamers.
Exactly. So that's like a major difference, even nymphs, now we've got all this fancy material and, woven flies and different glues and resins that we use and all this stuff. The wet fly, for instance, doesn't even exist anymore for all intents and purposes, which is unfortunate. It's a very effective way. Do
you even carry Hornbergs in your shop?
Yes, always. That's a great fly. That's a great fly. I do still carry those. I have a very small selection of wet flies, like a couple, March Brown wet, and just a couple of the classics for the people that do still enjoy to do that. And it's a forgotten art, an effective way to fish. And this is obviously a dry fly talk, but there's a difference between soft hackles and wet flies and nymphs.
What's going on in your background?
I don't know. It sounds like some ambulances.
That's not good.
Going down Clarendon Boulevard, yeah. But dry flies haven't changed as much, right? As streamers.
Streamers have evolved more every year. It's exponential. What goes into making ridiculous streamers? But you're right. Trout fly dries are kind of. There hasn't really been a massive evolution or influx of modern materials to make them unrecognizable, as you said, what they would have been 100 years ago.
Right. I mean, foam has certainly changed some things,
Polypropylene that floats.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
But it's all still deer hair, elk hair, moose hair.
Right. It's all the same stuff. It's all the same stuff. I mean, sure, you start to see extended bodies and, and in some cases you see foam versions of old classics. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think that most of those bugs are very similar to at least what I see in the old books, The chickens are better quality though. I'm sure.
Everyone says that.
Thanks to whiting, yeah.
All right, so what would you tie to make a fly more buoyant? Anything you would introduce to your pattern?
Mm-hmm.
And we can go into floatants here, if you'd like.
Yeah, we can. So the first thing I would do to make a fly more buoyant is I wouldn't change the fly. I would keep the same fly, but I'll add a couple extra wraps of hackle or a little bit more calf tail. Or a little bit more, I'll overdress the fly is what it would be traditionally called. So, I have 3 different versions. I fish that Charlie Mech fly a lot, that Patriot, in the late spring and early summertime, because there are a lot of sulfurs around. So that's my big searching pattern is that Patriot fly. I just like it. I can see it real well. But I tie 3 different versions of it. I try one version where I know I'm going to fish it in pocket water and it's real heavy. So it might be a size 14 or 16 hook, but there's enough material on there that it could be a 12. So I'm overdressing the fly with material. So it's a few extra, couple extra acts of hackle. It's a little bit more, calf tail on the post. I got a little bit of extra, I might sometimes even take the, usually for that fly, I'll use like hackle barbules for the tail. I might instead use some elk hair for the tail, or Comparadun hair and stick it in a hair stacker and use that for the tail, just to bulk it up a little bit more so I can see it and it can float higher, and you can do the same thing to make a fly a little bit lower of a profile, right? So if okay, look, I can tie a parachute fly real well, and I know I'm going to be fishing a lot of Tom Baltz taught me this trick. You tie like if you got fish that are a little bit pickier, you take a size, you can take a larger hook and you can put a lot less material on it and underdress a fly to kind of give it that lower profile if you're fishing a lot of flat pools where you might find picky fish.
Tell the folks who Tom is.
Tom Baltz is an old friend of mine. I actually just talked to him a few years ago. He's one of my many mentors in this sport. Tom's been around for since the dawn of day, and he's up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and he fishes he guides
hallowed grounds to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he fishes a lot of the older iconic streams on the East Coast. The Trout, Falling Spring, Big Spring, Yellow Breeches, and he's just an amazing guide and a very, very good friend. And he's got
his dry flies that's something else.
Yeah, he's one of the best. I mean, he's Pennsylvania State fly tying champ multiple times. His best fly, in my opinion, is the I Can See It midge. It's a little parachute midge pattern.
That's his pattern?
Yeah.
ICYI?
Yep.
I remember when that came out in the Orvis catalog. I was like, 01.
Yeah, that's a Tom Baltz pattern.
I did not know that. Mr. Martini, that was his fly.
That's right. Yeah. But, I think all of this fly talk, to be honest, is important, but none of it is anywhere near as important as the casting and the approach and just the confidence. We can sit and talk till we're blue in the face about flies all day long, but honestly, it's really, in my opinion, the flies are the most insignificant piece of the puzzle.
So before we get into presentation, I have some other fly tying questions, and then we'll into the presentations. Do you have preferences for your hook size, style, strength, eye size? Do you do like a specialty hook, like a clink hammer, specifically for tying a pattern? When you're sitting out to tie dries, what are you picking out of your hardware and why? Okay, well, it depends on the fly. Obviously, there's very different hooks for very different things. Typically, if I'm tying a Mayfly, I usually start with the Orvis 4641, which is their big eye dry fly hook. Right, it's got an oversized eye, so you can thread it easy. And it's got a really tiny little barb that's easy to mash. And that's just kind of one of their standard dry fly hooks that I tie most of my Mayflies on it that are, smaller than a 12 or smaller, right? If I'm tying something that's got that might be like a longer bodied Mayfly, like an ISO or a Drake or something like that, I might have to change it up and go with a different hook. If I'm tying a stimulator or something that might be a Stonefly, I'm obviously going to need a much larger hook and potentially something with a curve. So yeah, I mean my standard. I probably tie most of my dry flies on that 4641. Now, you like the straight eye versus a downturned eye, and if so, why?
To be perfectly honest, as it relates to dry flies,
sit on the water differently, a little surface tension action.
Some people say that it does. I don't think it does. Like if I'm putting a bunch of hackle on it, the hackle is, like especially on a mayfly, the hackle gonna perch on the water anyway, right? And if I'm using using it to tie like a comparadun style fly, I typically want it to or a parachute style fly. I want it to ride a little bit lower on the surface, so that's why I like the straight eyes for that kind of thing.
All right.
But I'm not super picky about it, in all honesty. And then typically if I'm tying something longer, right? Like if I want to do like a stonefly or a hopper, I tie my like Chernobyls and my hoppers on that 1638 Orvis, which is a 2x long dry fly hook. But I use other hooks too. But I guess those are my two kind of go-tos. That
Are you a barb smasher?
always. I smash them before I put them in my box, just so I don't forget.
They also, if you got a foam box, man, barb flies will mess up a foam fly box.
Yes, they will, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a barb smasher. I mean, I'm one of those people. I believe that barbs were put on hooks initially to hold the worm on.
That's what George told me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the deal. I think that tension keeps the fish on, and if I lose 1 out of every 10 fish or whatever because I don't have a barb, that doesn't really bother me so much. I think that's.
Do you have a preference of your thread when tying a dry fly?
Yeah, I think that people overcomplicate thread.
I use 3 colors in 2 sizes. It's either 6/0 uni or 210 denier / Orvis bass thread.
Yeah,
that's about all I use. Or I use mono 6/0.
I mean, man, that's a great, like, if I had to pick 2, those would probably be it. Yeah, I will say that it's nice to have. It's kind of like my feelings on like 7x and 6x. Like I just, there's 1% of the times you'll ever need that. But yeah, I guess 6x. The 6. I use the Orvis stuff and it works really well. But I've used other things in the past too. But 6/0 is my favorite, and I typically try to match the color. But I guess there are some times, like if I'm doing something really small, like sometimes I'll tie like really small parachute atoms, like 20s, and I don't ever tie or fish anything below a 20 ever. But I will use A-dot for that. But I don't use any. I almost never use 3/0 thread or anything in between there. I'm just like you. Like I go from 6/0 to
heavy. As George Janney would call it, goat rope.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some of the hardware you're going to use before we talk about the water you fish. Sure. What length leader would you be using with your specific rod?
Well, and again, right, I mean, the type of fishing you're doing is more about the environment. The length, the size and length of the rod is more about the fly that you're throwing and the environment than you're throwing it in than it is the fish. As an example, my favorite kind of all day, everyday rod is going to be an 8.5 foot 5-weight.
I thought you were going to go with your crazy 7s again. That's steelhead.
Yeah. 7 weights for steelhead.
What about action? So I think Orvis should bring back specifically 2 rods. All right. Henry's fork and the tippet.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You cannot get better trout rods than those 2. Yeah, those 2 to me are like a wine collector finding like a 1988 Lafitte Rothschild. Like it is absolute perfection.
So man, I would say that I like softer rods, for not even just for dry fly fishing. I'm just kind of a soft rod kind of guy, or medium action. Like, I went out to fish last night in the middle of the night. I blanked, but I went down to the Tidal basin at a high tide.
I'm going to say that wind played a factor in. Otherwise, you would have gotten some stripers and some, I don't know if perch are in yet, but you would have done well if it hadn't been so windy
Yeah,
with
it was
that
really
low air
windy.
pressure.
And that low air pressure, it was also blowing the tide out too because it was coming out of the north. I was throwing like a pretty good size 2-watt half and half on a 250 grain, or excuse me, a 200 grain sinking line, and I was throwing a Orvis Helios 3 9.5-foot 6-weight F, which is like a medium action, a little bit more finesse rod. So yeah, I enjoy like softer rods in general. So yeah, 8.5-foot 5-weight super fine touch and a 9-foot 4-weight super fine carbon are my two go-to dry fly rods that I use most often.
What about small stream if you got a canopy over you?
I never go below 8 feet. I have a 7.5-foot 3-weight rod, but I typically fish. I've got an old Sage something or other. It's a great rod. I can't remember what it is, but it's a Sage. It's an 8-foot 4-weight, and I have had it for, I don't know, 12 years, and it does me really well on most small streams. I like the little bit of extra reach, just so when I make my forward cast and the rod lands, I can keep a little bit more fly line off the water. I typically fish brook trout streams all directly upstream, and usually like the trees don't grow out of the center of the water, so I typically I'm casting kind of with a high elbow, sort of Joan Wolf style, right overhead. I don't typically have a problem with the trees above me. I mean, I get caught in the trees and snagged just as much as everybody else, but I think those longer rods in smaller streams are very helpful. I mean, the advent of things like Tenkara and I think all prove that the exception is the rule in those cases, in my opinion. We debate about that on our forum all the time, as you know.
Indeed. All right. So leader material, are you going to go fluoro or nylon? And then would you differentiate your tippet? Let's say you were doing a nylon leader, but fluoro tippet. Is that something you would do?
Yeah.
And what do you recommend for clients or customers?
That's a great question. So there's a lot of things there's a lot of misgivings or unsubstantiated information, if you will, that is sometimes disingenuous that I hear in fly shops in my experience across America, and a lot of these things have to relate to rod length and leader and tippet, and one is that fluorocarbon is specifically for nymphing and saltwater fishing because it has a faster sink rate, which is true. However, when you're fishing 5X tippet or 6X tippet, and you have whatever the diameter is, if you fill the sink up with water and you stick a bunch of floatant and dressing on that tippet and you drop it in the water, it doesn't break the surface, whether it's nylon monofilament or fluorocarbon monofilament, at least for a while. So I think in these smaller tippet sizes that we're talking about, I think fluoro is fine. However, and I do know the facts are that there's much more abrasion resistance for the fluoro. So especially if you're fishing for like brown trout who are a little bit more toothy, or bass, have that kind of like sandpaper mouth. And we're talking
teeth.
Yeah, and we're talking dries, right? So we can talk other species, right? Not just trout.
Redfish will eat a dry fly. I've seen it on the fly fishing film tour.
I think there's some things I really love about fluoro. There's a lower light refraction rate, so it's much more invisible under the water. And one good thing about fluorocarbon is that it lasts much longer because it's not as biodegradable. So as long as you're doing the responsible thing and not throwing the scraps in the water, that could be a good thing, unlike the nylon that degrades a lot faster. So there's some excellent properties, but the thing that isn't talked about with the fluoro is it's a little bit more rigid, right? It's not as supple. And so as it relates to dry fly fishing, for presentation reasons, I actually prefer the nylon product. So I fish the
Super
Orvis,
strong.
Yeah, I fish the Orvis Super Strong quite a bit. And sometimes I'll even fish the Super Strong Bimini tippets in certain scenarios. Yeah, I prefer the nylon personally. Now I will say this: if I'm banging like big hoppers on a bank, if I'm floating somewhere out west, or sometimes we'll do this on the Holston. The South Holston's one of my other favorite rivers that I love to dry fly fish. Everyone goes there to fish streamers, and
That's a hatch factory. Why would you go there to fish streamers when that stream is known?
It's
for
got
the crazy bugs it produces.
It's got a lot of big fish, So
Streamer bros.
Yeah, they love to go there and chuck the big streamers, and and look, it's a good place to do it. I mean, it's a phenomenal tailwater that's got a lot of big fish, and there's a lot of fish there, and it's definitely one of the best fisheries on the East Coast. I go down there. I used to host trips down there. One of my best friends in this industry, John Hooper, is he runs South Holston River Lodge and is just a phenomenal guide. And I fished with him, and yeah, I mean, a lot of these guides, they want to produce either a lot of fish or a big fish for clients and make them really happy. But if you get the right guide and the right angler and the right attitudes, you can float that river and just kind of take your time and post up on targets, and you can find a lot of big fish that will just come up and eat dry flies. And it's the same on the West Branch of the Delaware too. There's I always say on the D, if you catch 10 fish on that river, if you catch 10 fish, one of them is going to be close to 20.
It's right? Going to be a brown, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's an average size on that river, and I'm sure it changes, but there's an average size on that river. And I'm saying if you're throwing dry flies, right? I'm not talking about streamer fishing to catch a 20-inch fish, because you can do that there too. But I can't tell you how many very large fish that I've caught and seen caught on a size 16 rusty spinner.
What'd you catch that big fish on in Montana with Tim?
Which one?
The bull trout, man. What fish?
That was
thing was the size of a 4-year-old.
Yeah, that was on a streamer.
Okay.
That was on a streamer, but it was funny. Like, we were dry fly fishing right before that. We thought that was going to be a rainbow. That was an interesting fish. I remember the guide, Monty. We were doing. It was late season, and we were doing caddis, like big caddis patterns, searching patterns on the bank. And there was just we came up to an area where he said that look, I had clients all season have been hooking small cutthroat in this little, at the top end of this little run, right where it dips down into this pool and gets into some nasty water. And I think nymphing all season long. And he's like, I think there's a big rainbow down there. And I was like, all right, well, and I threw on a streamer and made a couple pulls, and bam, there it was. But it's funny that any single person, I think, on that boat would have caught that, at least hooked that fish that day. That was a right place, right time. That was not a skill type of thing whatsoever.
You only get that skill working in Orvis Tyson's, man.
No.
It's like having Panera on one side and outgoing Sweet Frog on the other. And I'm still pissed I didn't grab all the chairs from the dumpster when Sweet Frog went out of business.
Oh, man.
They had bistro tables and chairs. I grabbed 3 chairs And I'm pretty sure my wife threw them out because I didn't, and they're gone from my backyard. That power from working with George.
Yeah, and George is phenomenal. I love George to death. I miss working with him. Let's talk about Tim Linehan for a second.
We need to get him on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he would. I'm sure he would love to do a podcast with you. I mean, he is one of the most electrifying individuals. I mean, there is no human being alive that has as much energy as Tim Linehan. He is far and away one of my favorite guides that I've ever known, and his outfit and his guides, and really, his wife Joanne. They're just phenomenal people, and just a first-rate operation up there at that's Linehan Outfitting Company out of Libby, Montana. And I've hosted a lot of trips all over, and that's by far one of my favorites. They fish the Kootenai River up there, the Yak, sometimes the Clark Fork of the Columbia. They do trips in Missoula. They do trips on the, they spend a certain time part of the year on the Missouri. But the Kootenai is just a really special fishery, in my opinion, because it's very remote, all things considered. It's a very big river. I think it's the largest tailwater in Montana. It has some very large fish in certain parts of it. I think the state record rainbow trout is out of there. They have some very large rainbows in Libby, and those are wild rainbows too. And there's excellent cutthroat fishing there. There's the occasional brown trout, and then although you can't target them, there are bull trout in that system that are native, and
I've never met a more aggressive fish. You can say bluegills will eat absolutely anything. When I experienced bull trout in Idaho, there was nothing more aggressive I've encountered on a fly rod.
Yeah,
I said,
yeah, that was a very, very big fish. I don't know, at the time the guide there, well, the guides there, some of which have been there more than 20 years, they were convinced that was the biggest one they had seen. So they get pretty out of that river anyway, and they get pretty massive. But there's small ones too. I mean, I've caught little ones like on the Blackfoot on nymphs. I remember one year we were fishing we were in Missoula in April and hoping to get into, we were at the Orvis Guide Rendezvous.
Yeah, when you saw the otter up on the pass.
Yeah, and we were and I was there with Hank Patterson that year.
He does not like snakes or cilantro.
No, he's a really funny guy. And we were fishing. I think he was there for like a film tour type of deal or whatever. But some of us were fishing the Blackfoot, and the squallows weren't coming off, and we were early or whatever, and there was still snow on the ground. And we were fishing Pat's rubber legs and big Prince nymphs.
Who is Pat anyway?
I don't know Pat.
So we don't know Travis. We don't know Matthew, unless it's Craig Matthews, and we don't know Travis.
It is Craig Matthews.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's Craig Matthews.
Yeah.
So we're fishing Pat's rubber legs, catching little bull trout left and right.
What's little?
Right in there with the rainbows, and right in there with the cutthroat. 12, 14 inches.
All right.
And you couldn't not catch them, and the thing is you're not allowed to target them.
Yeah, no, all of mine were in Idaho it went from cutthroat to bull trout. It was a clear, as if there was a tidal line and you said, okay, stripers end here and smallmouth start here.
Yeah.
It was, there were no more cutthroat, and it was nothing but bull trout.
Wow.
I've never seen 8 to 15 fish chase a streamer and fight each other, knocking into it, as bull trout did on that stream in Idaho with my bacon fly.
I like that bacon fly. I have one of those in my box.
It is. If I ever get out on the boat again, I'm pretty sure my boat is going to have maple trees growing out of it in a week.
What is that? That's like the black one with the schlappen, right?
Man, no, you get rooster tails.
Oh, okay. Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, I'm slapping.
Yeah.
That's like Bud Light.
All
All right. So what else have we not talked about dry flies in this conversation before we go into some random questions? Anything I've omitted, been remiss to ask you?
Casting.
Casting a presentation. Let's talk about that. So how do you present a dry fly with no drag? Is that what I should be asking you?
Yes, probably. I mean, because I think that's the most important thing, right?
Booyah.
So it depends on the size of the stream. So I'm an advocate if the stream is small, right? And when I mean small, I mean like, less than 25, 30 feet across. You should probably just stick with upstream presentations, right? So typically those streams are going to be higher gradient rivers, and I think upstream presentations are pretty much indicative to those smaller streams. And the great thing about those upstream presentations is you almost always get a drag-free drift when you throw it upstream. Not almost always, but often. So, if you can break it down smaller than 25 feet across, you should almost always be casting, quartering directly upstream. And you should always, and this kind of holds true in my opinion to almost every dry fly cast, you should use more line than you need, right? So the trajectory of your cast, like let's say we're fishing a brook trout stream, the trajectory of your cast should be higher than it needs to be for the amount of line that you're casting. And what that'll do is it'll allow, and we've all done this by accident, right? If you throw a cast the trajectory a little bit higher, you'll create what's called a parachute cast, where the line that you're using will turn over and then kind of like kick back a little bit and fall into a pile of slack directly under the fly line, or directly just beyond the fly line. Like what you want is some slack in the leader and maybe in the first couple of feet of the fly line. So that slack is your friend. Slack is going to
Slack is your friend could be a t-shirt or a bumper sticker.
Yeah, absolutely. Slack is definitely your friend. And that is, if I had one statement to tell people about how they could be more successful dry fly anglers, it would be Slack is your friend.
Is that longer leader, rod tip higher, density or thickness of your fly line?
So it can be all of those things. And in all honesty, I would say that all of those things can, in fact, contribute to slack and suppleness of your presentation. But the casting piece is the most important. You can really manipulate learning a few different casts, like a parachute cast, a pile cast, a reach cast and a wiggle cast. And those things can all manipulate the fly line in a way that you can get drift. But if you're casting directly upstream, you should Google a parachute cast, which is going to allow you to, you're going to make a cast with a higher trajectory than you need for the fixed amount of line that you're using. And it's going to allow the fly to land accurately in the place that you're throwing it. But some of the leader and some of the fly line might land in a little bit of a pile, so that there's a little bit of slack for the current to pull out, resulting in a drag-free drift. So that current will pull out that slack before it'll pull on the fly, causing drag in the system.
All right.
And so that's typically basically stop the rod tip high, right? I always talk about one of my favorite casting instructors, and unfortunately we've never met before. He's a Federation of Fly Fishers Board of Governor. His name is Peter Hayes. And I've plagiarized for many years lots of his casting videos and some of his presentations, and I've adopted a lot of his ideologies about casting into the many lessons that I do. And he talks about this // routine, where I'm probably more well known for him with this more well known with this // thing than he is, because I say it all the time. But I'm pretty sure he came up with that. But the rod should, when you stop the rod on the back cast, it should look like a / on a keyboard, right? And when you stop the rod on the forward cast, it should look like a forward slash on a keyboard.
It's like Pete Kutzer talking about a slice of pie.
Oh, is that Pete? Pete's a great. I love Pete.
That was a fun. So I'm
great,
sitting there having a burger for dinner, and I look to my right, and Pete Kutzer's at the bar. I'm like, what is going on here?
Where were you?
Salmon River.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Dirty Bill can't float. They closed the ramps, I think, up there.
Really?
It was pretty strange. Not only having tall Pete Kutzer at the bar, but one of my clients was there.
Yeah.
Who bought us around.
So I went skateboarding with Dan when I was in Vermont.
Do you skateboard?
I'm not any good. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to, dabble or whatever. I'm not as good as Dan.
Can you ollie?
Oh yeah, I can ollie.
That's better than me, man.
But he was telling me how he went to, Dan took me to the skate park that he's helping to build, and he told me that Pete was going down the half pipe.
Ooh.
And then he fell a couple times, and it was a thunderous roar, and the ground shook.
A skateboard for Pete would be a snowboard with wheels or a boogie board with wheels. Yeah. It has to be proportional. So he's basically Andre the Giant. Yeah. Last time I saw him, he was like, anybody want a peanut?
You know what's really funny is when you see when you go up to Vermont and you go, like, if you see like him and Tom Rosenbauer in the same room.
That's a dichotomy of sizes.
It is. But anyway, this forward slash routine, typically we stop the rod and then we drop the tip down towards the water. So when you're dry fly fishing, unlike streamer fishing, you want to keep that rod tip high, right? You want to keep as much line off the water as possible. So when you stop the rod tip really high and you send the trajectory of the line a little higher than normal, you get a little bit of slack, right? And it's almost counterintuitive, because when we're learning to cast, we're learning that we want to straighten the fly and the fly line and the leader all completely out. And when you're dry fly fishing, you almost don't want to do that, right? You almost want to land with a little bit of slack. Another great cast to learn, if you're making a downstream presentation for some reason, like you're fishing a back eddy or something like that, is a pile cast. And a pile cast is a little bit different. A pile cast is actually more of a mend. You stop the rod tip high and you throw the line on a high trajectory, just like a parachute cast. But as soon as you stop the rod tip, then you drop it down towards the water, and you get slack from the tip of the rod all the way out to the fly, right? So it's a much more slack, and the fly kind of lands in a pile with the leader, and the current straightens it out as it goes down, right? Hey. So a pile cast is for downstream presentations, and a parachute cast is typically for upstream presentations.
Let's talk about dry fly floatings, and then we're gonna have to ask you some random questions.
Okay.
What are your preferences, and what do you suggest when a client comes in? And would you ever say, you know what, this is my preference over, say, what you may have read, but you've never fished before, but in my experience, I'm going to endorse this?
Yes. There's three things.
1, 2, 3. Bring it. I can count to 3 this late at night.
Yeah, the first thing is that no one ever uses anymore, and I don't know why this is.
Ear grease.
Line dressing. I dress my fly lines every time I go out fishing with line, leader, tippet dressing, right? It's a paste that I stick on the first, 30 feet of my line, my entire leader, and my tippet before I ever tie a fly on. That's part of my routine. And usually, unless I'm with somebody who I fish with often, usually somebody if I'm with, they're like, what is that? What are you using? I'm like, oh, I'm dressing my line. And they're like, well, what is that? Even if they're an experienced angler. And to me, that's the way I was taught, is that you first lubricate and you put this whatever, a petroleum substance on your fly line and your leader.
No damage to fly line?
No, I mean, that's what it's designed for, right? Because the problem is your fly line is picking up all this grime and this grit and this nastiness, and it's sinking, and it doesn't float as high, which causes drag. micro drag, and it keeps it's a substance that keeps it floating high, and it prevents it from getting dirty. So that's how I start. The second thing that I've realized is this is a common misconception. People often ask me, what do you prefer, water-based, petroleum-based, or powder? Do you get that?
I do the petroleum-based. I think the last one I purchased was Loon from Mountain Angler in Breckenridge, Colorado.
The Breck.
From home.
The Breck. Those two substances are made to work collaboratively. It's not and or, right? It's both at the same time. So the way I was taught, and maybe I'm crazy, but the way I was taught, and is that you pull the fly out of the box and you put the petroleum substance on initially on the fly to prevent water from getting in, right? So I use the nowadays I use the Orvis gel float, or Orvis gel float, which I love that.
I was once told don't put that on your waders.
Put it on the waders?
Is that a fallacy?
I don't know.
Someone said it would clog up the porousness of an Orvis wader and prevent water from being able to penetrate. That sounds like a complete oxymoron. We're going to negate that and blame that on larceny.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm going to blame that on larceny 22, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And there is literally no endorsement of this. It's just the only sipping. Dude, Alana has been taking my sipping bourbons and mixing drinks with them.
Oh, that's foul on the play.
Yeah,
that is foul on the play right there.
I got her plenty of gin, I got her a gin.
Granddad.
It's
Get
like
her some old Granddad.
Dude, that's what Devala drinks. No, he drinks Old Crow. Old Granddad?
Old Crow. He drinks Old Granddad too, but it's got to be bonded. And he'll sip that. He's brought that on fishing trips before.
All right.
But I think he's more refined now. The last couple times I've bourboned with him, he's had things that are, sometimes I'll bring Basil Hayden's and
who's been mixing drinks with that upstairs?
No,
the missus.
I'm
like, that's what Evan Williams is for. That's for mixing. Everything else, the Basil Hayden's, the larceny, the all the other exotic-esque bourbons we have are not for mixing.
No.
And she's like, but it's quarantine. You only live once. I'm like, listen, lady, it's my palate. You got gin, you drink your gin. I bought her a bunch of gin before this all happened. Let's do some random questions. You ready?
Okay, hit me.
Are you related to anyone famous?
Yes.
Okay, explain.
Yeah. I am related to Chaz Palminteri.
You are not.
Yes. Yeah. My mother is a Palminteri, and he is a...
Get out of town.
I swear to God.
Clevelander?
He's a second cousin or something to that degree.
All right.
He is not a Clevelander. I believe he is from New York. Yes, we are in fact related.
Now, okay, next question.
Uh-huh.
Where else would you be if you were stuck in a Groundhog Day? Because I've asked, if you could fish anywhere on your own Groundhog Day, where would you be? And now that is a reality of what we're living in, because every morning is the same to me. If you could be stuck anywhere else right now, where would you be?
And this is fishing.
I don't care, dude. It's Groundhog Day anywhere.
I would want to be... if I had to pick anywhere to be right now, I would want to be at the Game 7 of the NBA championship game. That's where I would be.
You're a basketball guy.
Yeah.
Now, would you want LeBron playing for Cleveland or Lakers?
Well, here's the thing.
I'm going to sit back for the LeBron conversation now as a Clevelander.
Yeah, in a perfect world, I would want LeBron James playing for Cleveland as a huge Cleveland fan. However, this is to me, this has been one of the most exciting NBA seasons that I've watched in many, many years as a fan. And LeBron being, 35 years of age, and this is his 17th year in the league, and he's leading the league in assists, and he's averaging, 27 points a game. And he is honestly the, in my opinion, maybe not the greatest basketball player of all time. Obviously, that's, to me, that's always going to be Michael Jordan. But as an athlete at 35 years old, 17 years into his career, and he's arguably, you're right, and he's an MVP contender this year. Is maybe, that's just an amazing feat. So, it's been a phenomenal season.
He's a good dude too, like all around good person. LeBron James, absolutely. Talent, has money, does good things with his money and his life, and is a role model.
He is, and he's great. He's great for the sport too. And other players love him and look up to him, and he's a mentor for people. And and not that Michael Jordan wasn't good for the sport, but Michael Jordan was a ruthless, competitive individual who terrified people.
Mm-hmm.
LeBron is looked at as more of a big brother figure, and sometimes maybe even a father figure for some of these guys. The way he fosters his relationships with other players and helps to protect them and helps them to foster and facilitate their futures as athletes is really good. So I'm a huge fan. This year I'd like to see him with the Lakers. I think it's I'd love to see a Milwaukee with Giannis Antetokounmpo versus the Lakers right now. That would be a phenomenal.
Is Bunny into the sports?
No, my wife is not a sports fan.
I hear that. All right, what's your most irrational phobia?
Irrational phobia?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Do you know how this question started?
Yeah. No.
So there is I'm going to blank on her name. She's Argentinian. She's a beer tie regular. She's dating another guy that they both come to beer ties. I took them out last year, and she claims that she has a friend that is scared of gumdrops.
That is irrational.
That is about the most, gumdrops. There's not a Latin term for that phobia. I'm going to look up I have my dictionary of word roots and combining forms right here. I guarantee you there's nothing about gumdrops. It's an unfounded phobia. But what about you?
All right. So this is when I was a little kid, I used to get night terrors, and really this is kind of a super bad dream. And I used to have this scary night terror that this like crazy lady would come and like tickle me in the middle of the night. And so I have a little bit of a phobia of being tickled. Yeah, dude.
Is there a name for this woman?
I don't know. There's no name for her. It was just this like reoccurring.
In Russian, there's Baba Yaga. She could be like Baba Tickle.
Maybe. Maybe. Yeah. It was like she had like a creepy face that was like, super scary. And we're talking like I was like a kid, like 6, 7, 8 years old. And I'd have this reoccurring dream that this like psychotic woman would like come running up the stairs screaming and like violently tickle me.
Everyone's going to like tickle your side now if we ever have a beer tie again in modern history. And do you know how thankful I am we don't have to shake hands anymore at a beer tie? Fauci says no more handshaking. If you had a superhero power to make you a better angler, what superhero's power would you choose?
I would like to. It has to be
It could be DC, Marvel. I don't care where your superhero comes from. It could be like that dude from Popeye who could eat 40 cheeseburgers at once.
It would just be flight. If I could fly, if I could fly like Superman, I could just go fish anywhere at any time, and I would get really good because I could just get a lot of practice. Like all my free time, I could I'm just gonna fly up to New Zealand.
You could just launch off your roof.
Yeah.
Okay, if you had a time machine to fly back in time It could be either a DeLorean, it could be a phone booth, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And you can fly back in time to a pristine environment before modern humans destroy that place. Where would you go?
Wow, that's a great question. Kind of like Aaron on The Office. I don't know if you're an Office fan, but
I can't watch it on Office, dude. The worst place to me ever was an Office.
I would stay here in the good old US of A, just because I've seen a lot, especially of like the American West, but just kind of this country in general. I would like to have seen here, especially as it relates to trout fishing, what it would have been like, before we came in and tampered with it, various logging industries and what have you. So with the power of going back in time and the power of flight, I think I would be a pretty awesome and well-traveled angler.
Do you have frequently asked questions you regularly get at the fly shop? And if so, is one of them extremely bizarre? Example, when I worked at Orvis Tyson, someone called once and asked if we sold raccoon traps.
So I get a lot of those at Orvis, and most of them are like, do you sell treadmills, or do you sell jock straps, or do you sell tennis rackets? We get a lot of that sporting goods type.
The bat and kill jock strap. It's olive with a brown leather trim.
Mostly, though, the most consistent one is people looking for guns.
Well, Orvis used to sell guns in the 90s.
Yeah,
You could buy shotguns at the Orvis Tysons.
Yeah, and I try to explain them, and people say that, and they're always like, well, it says that you're a licensed firearms dealer. And, I try to explain to them that's like, yeah, we sell like $6,000 bird guns with like, silver etchings and,
Can you imagine shooting one of those?
Yeah, I'm sure it's
All right, so if you were going to eat a hot dog, would you put ketchup or mustard on it?
Mustard, absolutely. My wife is also, there's a lot of things with hot dogs.
Are there Filipino hot dogs?
Yes. And let me tell you something.
I need to hear this now.
So there's a company out there, I think it's called Pure Foods, and they make red hot dogs. Now these hot dogs are definitely dyed with various colors, and there's no beef in them. But these Filipino hot dogs, they put them in spaghetti. It's not
kosher, is it?
Spaghetti.
Wait.
And spaghetti. Sugar. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to look this up. What are they called in the Filipino world?
Filipino? I don't know the Tagalog. I don't know. Tagalog is the language. I don't know what the if there's a name for it other than spaghetti. But their spaghetti has a ton of sugar in it. It's a red sauce and these chopped up little red hot dogs in it.
I want to murder that right now.
Yeah, good. Look at
Filipino spaghetti history. How the hot dog packed pasta took over. Thrillist.
Yeah. So
okay, I'm going to link this.
I've sent you Filipino recipes before.
Dude, I love some adobo chicken.
Yeah, did you make that?
Yes, and I want to make it on the Traeger, but I've not been to the grocery store in 4 weeks and 2 days. Yes.
Yeah. So they have hot dogs, but for me, I mean, as a Clevelander, let me just tell you what the perfect hot dog is. Okay.
I want to hear about a Cleveland wiener.
Yeah.
I know about a Cleveland steamer, and that's completely different.
Oh my God. So first of all, you need kielbasa, right?
Okay.
You need
not kosher at all.
And you need sauerkraut, and you need
gassy.
Stone ground mustard.
I like stone ground mustard. I don't like whole ground mustard at all.
Yeah, so it's got to be that's the action right there, and you need some pierogies to go with it, with a lot of butter and sour cream and onion.
You're killing me,
dude. Yeah, I mean it's amazing. A matter of fact, Trent and we do these feasts, right? Where because our wives are Filipinas, we do these like American feasts where they come over and we get together and we'll do a German one and we'll do a Western civilization feast is what we call
this is over, we're going to have all 4 of y'all's over here.
Yeah, it's fun, man.
We're going to Traeger. Trent keeps saying he's going to come over when I Traeger steak. and discuss his world travels, and then he can't come, and I just eat phenomenal dinner.
Yeah, he's been all over, man. All over.
I want to hear about Dubai, Amazon, Mongolia.
Yeah. We do these feasts though, and they're great. Like we do Crab Fest and we do German Fest, Oktoberfest.
It sounds like my pool on Friday nights.
Really? Yeah. We're doing oysters next. We were just talking about it.
Yeah, Mike's coming up next Friday.
Next Friday?
Yeah, I'll get you in touch with him. All right, next question. Ready?
Yeah.
What gear item you have not purchased but is on your wish list of items?
Ooh, that's a really good one.
Besides a Back to the Future Part 2 hoverboard.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really good one. What gear item? What gear item do I want? I don't know. Let's come back to that one. Let me think about that.
All right. What's your most played album?
Well, my most played album?
Yes.
Man, that's a good question too. Well, I mean, we don't really play albums anymore, right?
If you were to play an album back in the day, I still play albums.
Yeah. I was a big hip hop fan when I was a kid. It's probably Black Star with Mos Def and Talib Kweli, that band.
All right.
That's like self-titled album. I probably played that back in the day more than anything. But or Tom Waits. Probably.
I can't hear Tom Waits.
Yeah, probably.
It's like driving with a flat tire.
Frank's Wild Years might have been one of the most played albums, or Mule Variations probably. I probably played Mule Variations more than any album ever.
What species have you not caught yet that's on your bucket list?
Man, there's a lot.
I'm supposed to be in Key West right now going after a baby tarpon. That has been on my bucket list for millennia. Literally, because I used to work in the Keys during the millennial change. It's been on my bucket list for a millennia.
I would love to catch a Dorado probably.
That's a strong fish.
Yeah, I think I would really like that. I would really enjoy catching a Dorado, but I think a grayling might be a close second.
Working on that podcast.
Yeah, I think a grayling would be a close second.
What's the worst place you've ever fished?
The worst place I've ever fished?
Horrible fishing. As in, let's say, Simon Gosworth said Brittany, France. I'm going to say Martha's Vineyard. What was yours?
Well, it wouldn't be a city because all places I think have good and bad, but the worst place I've ever fished is probably, a lot of people are going to hate me for this, man, but it's got to be Elk Creek over the years in PA. I
caught the most beautiful steelhead I have ever hooked was Christmas morning on elk. And I'm going to give a shout out to Joe Greasebaum, who has the Ugg Bugs, and he's tying like crazy right now on Facebook. So find Joe Greasebaum and find him for his Ugg Bugs. And he landed my fish. Yeah, that creek was very pretty, very strange to me after only really knowing Salmon River.
Yeah.
But I caught the prettiest steelhead of my career on a bacon fly on Elk Creek.
As much as I love Great Lakes steelhead fishing and all the people in it, and I don't mind the crowds at all. Like I'm a people person. I love getting to know people, and I don't mind, hanging out and chit chatting and stuff like that. But that particular stream, I believe, has deteriorated over the years and has drawn some elements of people that otherwise I wouldn't rather see there. And so, that to me, that has become one that I've steered away from. Used to be great when I was a kid, and I'm sure it still has a ton of fish in it. And it's not about that. It's more about just, people fighting and yelling at each other. And
not cool.
Yeah.
Especially when there's a pandemic. That's why you got to be like a Jew like me and go fish on Christmas Day. All right. What's the strangest question a customer's ever asked you at a fly shop?
The strange.
Like I said, someone once called and asked if we sold raccoon traps.
I've gotten a lot of strange questions, but I think the strangest is got to be what. No, that's not the strangest. The strangest question I've ever got is, would you be willing to make out with a man for money? I got that one time.
Okay. I'll
Yeah.
take that. What is the best sandwich you've ever eaten on a fly fishing trip that you would recommend to others?
Oh my Lord. That would definitely be if you're heading to fish the Chagrin River in
What about Bob's is gone?
Northeast Ohio. What about or Corky and Lenny's is a good one.
Corky and Lenny's is my family's people.
Yeah,
that's like my jam. Why don't we have that in Fairfax? I don't know.
Yeah, you know, a nice pastrami from there.
Oh, dude, you're killing me now. Come on.
Yeah, there's also, you know, if you're fishing the west side of Cleveland, like if you're gonna go
Toledo buntheads.
No, I would say Melt. Grab yourself a grilled cheese sandwich from Melt in Lakewood, Ohio, on your way to the Rocky River. That's also a phenomenal sandwich.
It's 9:19 p.m. I would murder somebody for that sandwich right now.
Yeah, I mean, they've got all sorts of different grilled cheese sandwiches at Melt.
I can't handle it, dude. We got to change. No, we're changing the subject.
Okay.
What have you learned about your wife during quarantine? For me, A, she eats string cheese by biting it like a hot dog.
Yeah.
And B, she does not know how to nest bowls in a drawer. She just puts bowls and strainers and colanders in randomly.
I have learned how much of an indoor cat she is. Like, I am absolutely going insane. Absolutely insane.
What floor are you on?
We're on the 8th floor.
Okay.
And like, to me, this is just like, you know, and listen, I don't mean to sound, I mean, obviously we're in a global pandemic and this is a very serious situation, and, you know, and people are dying, and it's terrible.
It's freaking horrible, but my daughter will not leave my shadow from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. every day. And I want to go, I'm going to take up running probably tomorrow. I don't want to run, but she cannot run as fast as I used to be able to run.
Right.
And I want to get away from my child.
Yeah.
As long as I wanted to have a kid, oh my goodness. An only child, and my wife and daughter are apparently buying a puppy. I don't want to be near them. I have to get away from them.
What about Dr. Jones?
He gone, man.
Oh, no way.
Wait, you didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, he's been gone since October.
Oh, man. I'm sorry.
Dude, Snouts would have been 15. So they're looking at a wired-haired wiener dog after Ed Felker, and my wife wants to name it Colonel Mustard. But yeah, puppies apparently are really hard to get right now.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so look, I'm grateful for the fact that, like, you know, we have the ability to stay in the house and be, you know, quarantined or shelter in place or whatever it is being called. But yeah, that's what I've learned about my wife is she's acclimated to this extremely well. She's working from home, but yeah, she's very much an indoor cat and extremely resilient as it relates to this kind of thing where I'm kind of a baby about it.
Is your laugh a source of renewable energy? Can we tap into that and make money?
Yeah. People comment on my laugh quite often. I don't know. I've been told it's infectious. I've also been told it's obnoxious. So
I'll take the in between. We'll take the median. We'll take N.
Sure.
All right. What is something every angler looks over as an essential gear that they should carry? I'm going to say a file for hooks.
A file for hooks is a good one. I own a file. Very rarely do I ever take it out and use it on the river. I will switch flies, but I do sharpen my hooks from time to time.
Essential. Dude, that is like,
Like I'm known to sharpen hooks prior to a trip.
Yeah, I'll tell my clients, like, the quote is, I need to check the integrity of that hook. They ding something up, I'm like, yo, I'm checking that hook. I got my file hanging out of my backpack. All my other tools are inside the backpack or on my utility belt.
PJ Daly is also a
hook geek.
Yeah, he's a hook
What
geek.
does PJ stand for? Pajamas?
Phil.
All
yeah,
right.
I think it's Phil Daly. Yeah.
I think I just need to call him
Phil
and get
Daly
him on.
Jr.
Let's get him on this.
Yeah.
We need to learn about the slipperiness of the Savage. All right, next question. You ready?
Yeah.
Any Cleveland urban legends that you're aware of?
Oh, there's millions. Tons of them. What do you want?
Well, I mean, you know about the Buddy Man of Northern Virginia.
Vegetable, mineral. What do you want?
Monster. Crypto. So that feeds into do you have a favorite cryptozoological organism?
Oh, Mothman in West Virginia.
I'll take that, dude. Knows about that. Ellis with his polarized glasses.
So there's a great book called Haunted Ohio. And
it's about my Russian in-laws.
Yeah. So absolutely, man. There's a bunch of urban myths, urban legends. One in Cleveland is the witch's grave, which is
I don't want to know about that, but tell me.
Well, so this is a crazy story. So I grew up, fishing the Rocky River. I'm not going to hotspot anything, but this is a really good tip to a good fishing spot if people want to read into this and figure it out. But there's a cemetery in a certain undisclosed place on the Rocky River that's got an urban legend that surrounds it called the Witch's Grave. Apparently, and I don't know that this is true, but it probably is, that the only person in the entire state to ever be executed for being a witch is in fact buried there. And, kids go there in the middle of the night and, run around and, scream and yell and claim that there's a ghost.
Bunny Man Bridge out here.
Yeah. And so that's one. There's also another one about an ancient or a haunted Indian burial ground at Tinker's Creek off the canal, the same canal we got here.
All right, next question. You ready for this?
Yep.
What is something everyone looks over as an essential piece of fly fishing gear? This could have been the hook file. What is something that customers come into a shop and they always seem to pass over and you're like, y'all really can't go out without this?
Split shot.
All right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I need another good Joe Humphrey story. I told you this was question number 20.
Another good. Well, no, I already gave you one of those.
Okay.
Do somebody else. Yeah.
Dan Davala or John Bellata.
John Bellata or Dan Davala. Wow. I've got some stories on
non-goat related.
On those as well. I wasn't there for the goat one, so okay. No, you need to do George Layton on the podcast. He was there for the goat one, so you can get the goat story from George.
All right. If you only had one type of soup to eat for the rest of your life, what would it be?
One type of soup?
Soup.
Matzo ball soup.
For real, dude?
Yeah, I love it. I'm a big fan.
Oh, dude, I am so impressed with that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Do you have a favorite Spice Girl?
Yeah, for sure, man. I would do Sporty Spice, I think.
Okay.
That's the one I think I liked when I was a kid. I had a crush on her.
If you only had one bird species to tie flies with, what would it be?
It'd be a chicken.
If you could go back in time to fish with a legend, who would it be?
Oh, wow. If I could go back in time to fish with a legend, geez, that's a really good question. I would want to fish with like a fly fishing legend or just any freaking angler.
Fly fishing legend. Anybody that was involved, like Isaac Walton.
Yeah.
Or, let's see, George Harvey.
Yeah.
Who would you want to fish with?
That's a really good one. I would want to fish with Mel Krieger.
Womp womp.
Yeah, absolutely. Womp womp womp. I just he's got an energy about him and an attitude that I just I really like. I think I would have learned a lot from him.
Do you carry a gear, vest, bag, shoulder sling? What do you carry with you when you fish?
That really depends, man. And the answer to that
What would be in it?
The answer to that more often than not is none of the above.
All right. What do you carry with you that are essential items?
I'm going to tell you the best piece of equipment that I've ever purchased. Orvis carries a small, it's like a mini hemostat with a scissor in it.
Absolutely swear by that. That's a Civil War invention, as I've been told.
Really? And I keep that on a little lanyard.
Yes.
Right? And it's kind of to poke fun at like people who buy like $100 pair of nippers. I keep that on a lanyard around my neck.
As I was told, that was to suture or stitch and suture Civil War patients single-handedly by doctors, is the way I was explaining that device. And the Orvis scissor with hemostat might be one of my favorite tools of all time. If I leave that at home, I'm screwed.
I know. I freak out whenever I can't find it.
Yeah. And it has a smasher for split shot.
That's right. I use the mini one.
Ooh, do you have small fingers? Are you like a carny? Small hands, smell like cabbage?
I love that movie. But I typically, like if I wear waders, I don't wear any packs or anything, right? I put my fly boxes like in the waders in my kangaroo pouch that the wading belt creates. So I'll just put like one fly box and then I use the pockets of the waders and the pockets of my shirts or my wading jacket. Like I don't really believe that you need always a pack or a sling pack or a vest or whatever. If you need one of those things, you are taking too much than you need more often than not. Now, if I wet wade, however, I typically use one of those things, and I don't have a vest anymore. I used to use a vest, but I got rid of it.
Orvis Super Tackle Pack was the greatest vest ever invented. It was a one-hand opening and close, sort of like my beer right here.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. It's a slap bracelet from the Australian Embassy. And it was basically slap bracelet material in a vest pocket. So you could open it with one hand and it would close. Here's the closing my beer. Ready? Hold on. It is my Aussie, Australia, and United States celebrating the first 100 years. It's for prayer. Yeah, so Super Tackle Pack by Orvis was a one-handed. You didn't need to open a zipper or anything. You could just put your hand in, expand it, grab your fly box, pull it out, and it would close. And then when you wanted to put it back in, you would just open your hand, open the pouch, and stick it back in, put your hand out, and it would close.
Also, you need to carry, when you're dry fly fishing, you need to carry like 40-pound or 30-pound test. Like if you're fishing like 5X leader and your butt section is like, I don't know what it is, 28 thousandths of an inch, you need to have, to be able to lengthen your leader, you want to carry butt section material, not tippet material.
All right.
So like to lengthen your leader, add it to the butt section, not the tip.
Well, you ready for my last question?
Yeah, hit me.
I need a story that you had to have been there to believe.
Yeah, okay. So there's a spring creek in Western Maryland, and it's kind of a well-known spring creek, or it's kind of a well-known spring creek that's, an hour from DC, an hour and 15 minutes from DC. It's, it's a small creek, 25, 30 feet across. And Trent Jones and I were there one time and it was spring, and we were walking along and, fishing and trying to do some dry fly fishing. And we walked across the stream, and there was a particular bend pool, and it had a 30-inch brown trout in it. And it was in maybe freaking 2 feet of water, and maybe it was 28 inches, maybe it was 32 inches, but it was the largest.
Freaking huge, man.
It was the largest inland brown trout
freaking huge guys
I had ever seen. and it was in 18 to 24 inches of water in a stream that was 25 feet across. And we proceeded to cast at it and change flies, and we didn't catch it. And now that I'm telling you this story, I just thought of one that's even better.
Tell it.
Also with Trent Jones.
Oh my God.
We're driving.
Common law brother.
We're driving through the Catskills.
Middle light.
And we're on some back roads, okay, in the Catskills, coming back from fishing Delaware. And we're of course he's making fun of me for my terrible driving, which a lot of people do. Including Tom Rosenbauer and Joe Humphrey, who we've talked about. I've actually got an autographed first edition of the Orvis guide, the Orvis fly fishing guide, where Tom writes in it, "Hey, Art, hey, let me grab it. I'll tell you what it says." It's like a very sarcastic, sorry, I kind of totally segue, but it says here, "To Art, Navigator Supreme. It was great fishing with you. And I hope we get to do more of it." Anyway, so we're driving around these back roads and, winding farm, roads. And in the distance, we see a giant cow, okay, up on a hill. And this isn't like any normal cow. This cow is like 5 to 7 times the size.
The biggest cow of all time.
The largest cow in the history of
a true heifer, if you will.
And we're both in the middle of singing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young songs. Often when we go on long drives, we sing, and we both stopped because we knew something was wrong. And we didn't say anything. We just looked over at this alien cow, and it took and as we're looking in shock. And kind of the world stood still at that particular moment in time. We're looking up on the hill, and the cow took its back legs, one of its back legs,
right,
and it scratched its own ear with its back leg, and then put it back down on the ground.
Are cows not supposed to be able to do that?
I don't know, dude, but this was not just any cow. This was a giant cow.
The biggest cow of all time.
This is the largest cow. It's
like the butter cow they make at the Ohio State Fair. Go Buckeyes.
Dude, yeah. I mean, this was an alien life force is what this was. And it scratched its ear with its hind leg.
All right. So when quarantine is over, where can listeners find you?
Well, they can find me at Orvis Arlington in Clarendon here in Arlington, Virginia. The second Monday of every month, you can find us at Whitlow's, and I'm there representing Tidal Potomac FlyRodders.org. We are a
501c3.
Yeah, we're a 501c3. We're a Federation of Fly Fishers charter club, Federation of Fly Fishers International. We teach people how to fly cast and tie flies, courtesy of Rob, and we do beer ties. I think we may even have the oldest. We might be the original beer tie.
You're the OG.
We may have, our members may have even started that, from what I understand. I haven't been around as long as some, but and we just protect and conserve and draw attention to and promote the Potomac River and the fisheries here in the area. So you can find me there.
All right, dude.
Awesome, man.
You rock out.
A lot of fun.
Have fun quarantine.
Yeah, you too, buddy.
All right, dude.
Thank you for joining us for the Fly Fishing Consultant Podcast. For more information or to contact Rob, please go to www.robsnowhite.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Freestone Productions at freestoneproductions.com.